"They're not evac crates, General. There are no reclamation beacons inside them." The lieutenant's voice cracked through the channel as the last shuttle broke cloud cover, engines snarling through vapor-thick turbulence. His visor caught the scorched orange of Cul-de-Siv's horizon, a churning mess of gas plumes, obsidian ridges and tectonic flares rupturing in rhythmic convulsions. There was no orbital staging, no fallback corridor, no rescue relay warming up in geosynchronous drift. Just a series of drops and a directive, stamped not with urgency, but with sterilized indifference. "Repeat that, Lieutenant." General Avis's tone stayed even, bored almost. The comms relays aboard the Accord flagship filtered out most of the background distortion, but the atmospheric pressure outside was destabilizing. Pressure plates groaning in protest under gravity surges, measured in full gravics. "They're not supply marked. No med rigs, no terraformers. We're dropping them with prefabs and 3 days rations." A pause. "Copy received. Close the file. Tag it resolved." That was the final logged communication before Cul-de-Siv vanished from Accord nav charts. Weeks earlier, in a classified logistics summit buried within the Accord's Sovereign Systems Forum, a vote had passed, with minor objections. Terran expansion had overstretched, igniting disputes across multiple fringe sectors. Rather than negotiate corridor access or redistribute mineral rights, it was cleaner, more efficient, to select a location unfit for diplomatic return. Cul-de-Siv had the necessary conditions: volatile plate activity, sky-layered sulfur cyclones, bioperdition at apex density. It failed all parameters for long-term viability. In other words, it was perfect. The term used in internal documents was strategic resolution. Officially, Earth was informed the 312 colonists were rerouted during an unexpected atmospheric breach on their intended destination, Darson's Reach. The breach itself was fabricated through doctored sensor logs and corroborated by a falsified pilot incident report. None of it ever crossed public record thresholds. By the time Earth's expansion board tried to audit the reroute, the board itself had fractured due to cascading resignations and funding seizures triggered by planted financial inconsistencies. Within months, the entire file path was sealed under Level 9 clearance, buried so deeply that even Earth's foreign envoys couldn't trace the event without triggering internal lockdowns. The colonists themselves had no idea. To them, it was just another planetary reclamation mission, dangerous, under-sequited, but not without precedent. The pre-deployment brief included all the usual platitudes: build strong, monitor weather bands, wait for orbit-to-ground tether confirmation. Nothing seemed wrong. They even saluted as the shuttles descended. 5 pods, 64 men each. 1 systems crew shared between them all. No permanent AI, no defense grid, no orbital fallback, just wind, tremors, and a planet that hated its own crust. Visual records recovered years later showed the first week: humans pitching into volcanic dust with weatherproof tents, fighting collapsing shelters and corrosive fog. Footage from inside their command prefab, stitched together from multiple declassified modules, showed one technician coughing blood after a filtration failure, another snapping a nutrient line in frustration, shouting about missed satellite passes. At day 12, all external contact ceased. Officially, Earth flagged the colony as presumed lost in environmental collapse. No recovery was mounted. The region was declared a black zone. Accord Communications claimed atmospheric saturation rendered orbital insertions non-viable. Earth didn't question it, not because of trust, but because their channels had been surgically severed from within. In a forgotten subdirectory of Earth's expansion protocol archive, a final transmission attempt pinged back to the Caldus relay. It never reached the surface. 31 years passed. Within those decades, Accord diplomats spoke often of Terran unreliability, of the human tendency toward expansionist short-sightedness. No mention was ever made of Caldus I. Earth's next generation of officials assumed the mission was a failed outpost lost to poor planning. The name was occasionally raised during committee oversight, but never triggered formal investigation. By then, it wasn't even listed among active planetary designations, one redacted planet among thousands. But the colonists never declared themselves dead. Inside an archived enforcement terminal in the Strategic Recon Office, a terminal long marked inactive by Earth's Defense Intelligence, a dormant protocol blinked into the active node stream. Protocol Virex-R was never a recovery algorithm. It was a deadman ping, set to activate if a planetary anomaly was not overridden within a defined time window. Virex-R did not transmit a rescue signal. It transmitted location metadata, a beacon that screamed through 17 jump relays until it was intercepted by a black-fagged analyst assigned to system obsolescence. That analyst was Commander Garen Morsk. Morsk had no clearance for full review. He had burned through most of his political capital years ago, resigning from Earth's Interstellar Envoy Corps after a failed peace accord left 29 Terran engineers stranded on a fractured orbital bridge in the Ornith Verge. He never forgot. Never forgave. When he saw the beacon, raw data, not scrubbed through diplomatic filters, he activated a backdoor mirror protocol and downloaded the file before Central Archives could flag it. He didn't take it to his superiors, he took it to his own archive. And there he found it, the last still frame from Caldus IV's surface. A shuttle, partially buried in oxidized ash, colonist numbers still visible on the side. 4 men stood outside, holding jury-rigged filter masks and weathered excavation gear. One raised a hand, not waving, not asking. A still image, paused at the moment, just before movement. Beneath the frame, the metadata contained a final timestamp and designation stamp. Evac 17, status reclassified. The coldness of that tag haunted Morsk more than anything else. Reclassified, not destroyed, not confirmed dead, just rewritten. He pressed his palm to the interface. The screen didn't flicker. It pulsed with location data. Morsk leaned closer, breath fogging the screen's edges, tracing the orbital drift. He whispered one word to himself. Not into a report. Not into an official channel. They're still there. No one answered. He leaned back, eyes narrowing, then began pulling mission packs out of storage. He accessed his private cache of decommissioned probe schematics, retrofitting one for stealth observation and hardened surface entry. The probe had no flag, no registry. It wasn't meant to be seen. He loaded the coordinates and stood still for a moment. Not for reverence, for calibration. When the probe launched from an unauthorized auxiliary port beneath Earth's southern polar platform, it carried no message of goodwill, no apology, no rescue. Just one mission directive tagged to its internal manifest file, confirm continuity. Morsk didn't know what he'd find, but he knew what had been buried. And Caldus, even after 3 decades of silence, was about to speak again. The launch bay door sealed behind the unauthorized probe, vapor locking with a hiss that stung Mork's ears. He stood in the manual override booth, one hand pressed to the biometric control panel, the other gripping a handwritten operations pad. No linked systems, no uplink echo. The pad contained every calculation he'd rerun over 4 nights. Trajectory corrections, radiation flare windows, probe shielding variances, timing gaps in orbital sweeps. He didn't trust automated logic, not for this. The relay sequence began. The probe's outer casing buckled against pressure coils, groaning like frozen steel twisting under stress fractures. Morsk didn't flinch. He watched the green launch marker crawl into view through the viewport slit, eyes following the arc like a man watching a door creak open after 30 years of knocking. The micro-engine burn left a flickering trail in the upper atmosphere, visible only for seconds before the curve of Earth swallowed it whole. Morsk turned away before it disappeared. Inside his quarters, barracks ship-shifted, stripped of any markings except a dented shelf of personal files. He reconnected the uplink cable to his terminal. The screen blinked once. He entered the authentication string. Access. Abandoned known. The interface opened like a wound torn into classified memory. He didn't browse. He knew exactly which file tree to access. He moved directly into the routing logs, bypassing registry warnings. The probe had reached solar ecliptic drift phase. In 37 hours, it would cross into Caldus Ives' gravity corridor. He leaned back into his chair, every muscle rigid. The air in the room felt thick, stale, like breathing through cloth soaked in cleaning solvent. He didn't open the ventilation system. He didn't need comfort. He needed results. A knock struck the outer bulkhead, once, then again, sharper. Morse keyed the door. A junior analyst stepped in, eyes darting between Morsk and the unshielded terminal. "Sir." Headquarters flagged, an unauthorized launch. Morsk stared at him without blinking. "You're mistaken." The analyst shifted on his feet. "They're rerouting internal reviews. If they ask who had system-level access to D-74's side channel." "Anybody won't." Morsk's tone dropped. "You didn't see anything. You weren't here." The analyst hesitated, eyes caught on the data feed flickering across the screen. One line drew his attention. "Calderside's signal, echo, confirmed." "Sir." That world was locked down during the migration protocols. Why would a probe? Because someone made a decision they didn't want remembered? Morsk didn't shout. He didn't lean forward. He spoke with the cold certainty of a man who had read too many erased histories. The younger man glanced again at the display, then stepped back through the hatch without another word. Morsk waited until the corridor lights dimmed before opening the next sequence. The probe's optics engaged as it entered the planet's lower orbital tier. Visual feed arrived in compressed slices. Grainy topography, erratic atmospheric layering, thermal shadows dancing across rock plateaus. No signs of engineered construction yet, but something in the transmission patterns made him pause. The signal didn't reflect like static. It bent, like passing through curved glass. That meant shielding, that meant manipulation. Someone down there was reshaping orbital return signals. He increased magnification on the surface grid. There it was, a low-bloom heat cluster, spread with such exact spacing that it resembled a natural geothermal anomaly, until the outermost points lit in sequence, a timed pattern, deliberate, coordinated. Morks's fingers twitched against the input keys. He typed a single prompt into the scan terminal. "Search for synthetic energy harmonics." The probe returned a spectral deviation code. Not natural. His mouth tightened. He tapped a recording module and began speaking. "Recon Entry 1, Planet Caldus IV, designated Black Zone since collapse year 7. Probe has detected energy configurations consistent with designed infrastructure, cloaked to mimic geothermal dispersion. Source pattern matches Earth Defense Phase 3 grid scaling, discontinued 28 years ago. Matching alignment suggests organized adaptation by human architecture systems. Probability of survivor presence above 93%. He stopped. The number hung there. He deleted it and said nothing further. The probe turned east across the planetary equator. Morsk rewound the feed, scanning frame by frame. Something in the top right quadrant. A cluster of lines on a cliff face. He enhanced it. The lines weren't cracks. They were etched coordinates, burned into the stone like someone had aimed a thermal lance and used the cliff as a ledger. Coordinates formed a triangle. At its center, a hollow crater with irregular crater walls and grid-line breaks. Morsk switched to infrared. A tunnel mouth blinked open. Heat trails emerged in pulses. The layout matched no known mining operations. He activated his external archive recorder and keyed a secure update to a non-bankward drive. Strategic Recon 1, Caldus I shows infrastructure not registered in Accord archives. Imaging indicates energy-based defense systems embedded in native terrain. No Accord tags, no Accord power patterns. This was built from scratch, without aid. He paused again, then added, "They weren't waiting for rescue." He switched off the terminal and opened his personal logbook. A real book, printed pages, graphite entries. He scratched out the last line from 3 weeks ago. Loss confirmed. Caldus site sealed by erosion and collapse. In its place he wrote, "We were wrong." He flipped the page and began drafting contingency alignments. Not for retrieval, for contact. Not through Accord diplomatic channels. They would intercept, sanitize, bury again. He needed to prepare a contact string, a way to speak without being seen. A language built from history and betrayal. He began pulling fragments from archived Terran defense cipher manuals, some obsolete, others deemed psychologically unstable due to early post-corruption application errors. Those were perfect. No Accord AI would recognize them. No standard decryption would unlock their patterns. And tapping out the first 10 lines, he wrote an interlaced string designed to mimic natural magnetic pulses, readable only through magnetic field scanning arrays. It read, "Earth remembers." Then he began composing a message to Earth Command. He wouldn't send it. He just needed to see the words. Earth Central Authority / Division of Strategic Contingency. RE Caldus I / Status. Operational. Request. Immediate black site funding for deep contact retrieval. Survivors presumed active. Defense systems functional. Accord must not intervene. He saved the message to his encrypted external module, disconnected the uplink, and pocketed the drive. No one would fund this, no one would even acknowledge it. He would move alone. Inside his locker, beneath a false floor plate, lay a sealed toolkit marked with the Terran emblem long since retired. A human hand, wrapped in chain, breaking through fractured glass. He pulled it free and opened the top compartment. Inside, a communicator, untraceable in short range, a terrain-adaptive suit stripped of all smart functions, and a card. On the card, written in smudged ink, "If you ever hear it again, go." He looked up at the console screen one last time. The blinking dot on Caldus Ive hadn't faded. It pulsed, steady, waiting. Mission log, entry 3, G. Moore. Subject, Caldus Ive recon feed. Visual integrity, intermittent. Audio, clean. The drone feed snapped back after a static flare, revealing terrain unlike anything Morsk remembered from the original briefings. Where the topographical maps had shown collapsed strata and fissured plains, the updated visual revealed layered geometry. Trenches weren't natural anymore. They had symmetry. Angled slants reinforced with what looked like slag-reinforced walls. Some glinted in the filtered sunlight, not metal. Polished stone, hardened and veined with fused mineral composites. Handmade, not dropped in by orbit. "Run the thermal sweep again," Morsk said aloud, his voice bouncing off the stripped panel walls of the mobile recon chamber. The onboard system didn't respond. He didn't wait for it. He tapped through the controls manually, skipping the AI-guided telemetry. Artificial intelligence had missed this once before. He wouldn't let it miss again. Thermal overlays lit the screen in patches. Shreds where there should have been cold basalt, streaks of yellow woven like vascular systems beneath the rock line. Power grids, but not surface mountal, buried, shielded, controlled. Then, one frame later, a thermal spike flared. He paused the footage and zoomed in. What should have been a collapsed plateau now housed concentric heat bands encircling a series of crater depressions. At the center, a black shape, square and too uniform to be natural. Its shadow cast directly east, marking its rigidity. This wasn't rock. It was a structure. He backed the feed up 6 seconds, adjusted the angle, and activated atmospheric refraction correction. The filtered overlay processed slowly, churning pixel clusters. When it stabilized, the full shape emerged. A vertical obelisk, cracked but still standing, with what looked like branching antennae coiled in copper-colored strands. It wasn't a monument, it was a relay. The same signature repeated 12 kilometers south, taller, anchored into the wall of a volcanic ridge. Another tower. Morsk leaned closer. The towers hadn't been added, they had been buried, masked by geological realignment. Someone had used the tectonic shifts to hide infrastructure. He checked the seismic analysis logs. Localized tremor disruptions matched the alignment points of the towers, not just buried, redirected. The colonists had reprogrammed a fault line. He turned on his recording module. New visual confirmation of artificial construction embedded within faltered terrain, infrastructure not added post-deployment, formed through manipulation of planetary mechanics. Terraforming observed. Full-scale environmental restructuring underway. His breath fogged the screen as he clicked into the South Quadrant visuals, The drone dipped lower, navigating a series of ravines. Heat signatures shifted. Then, movement. Figures. 3, maybe 4. Broad-shouldered, wearing gear too rugged to be corporate issue. Their suits were composite layers of stitched fiber and hardened carapace, clearly reinforced against predator attacks. One of them held a curved staff, tipped with what looked like an ion core, repurposed for mining equipment. Another led a bipedal creature, thick-bodied, taloned feet, jaw-lined fitted with a muzzle device, a domesticated predator. The drone hovered, stabilizers adjusting automatically. The figures turned their heads upward all at once. The drone froze mid-air. Power readings dipped. Then the feed whited out. Morsk yanked the controls, slamming the auxiliary visual sequence. Static. Then, unexpectedly, the drone reactivated. But the view was different, angled slightly lower, as if the drone had shifted on its own axis. The ravine now displayed the northern cliff wall. And there, just beneath a shelf of blackened rock, was a message, scorched into the stone face by directed heat, kept standing. Not a name, a statement. The feed distorted again. This time the camera didn't recover. The lens core burned out. Temperature readings surged past operational tolerance, and the visual link terminated. Morsk watched the telemetry line fade to null. He sat back, breath shallow, pulse beating in his throat like a drum against the inside of a cracked helmet. These weren't survivors. These were architects. He activated the backup drone still docked in the recon vault, one level below the hangar. This one was older, heavier, not built for stealth, but it carried an enhanced atmosphere scanner and magnetic field mapper, hardware deprecated decades ago, but now exactly what he needed. As it deployed, he opened a secondary channel and ran a decryption trace on any open frequencies the first drone had tagged before it failed. Nothing, just static. Then, just before he closed the channel, something pushed through. Not audio. Heard. He fed it through a defragmentation filter. The results came in staggered bursts. Irregular data clusters, timed not by pulse but by magnetic fluctuation. The string was short, only 4 glyphs. An Earth code. Morsk recognized it instantly. We remember. He stared at it. Not a distress signal, not a warning. A memory. Preserved. Delivered deliberately. He accessed his notebook, flipping to the next clean page. He sketched the arrangement of the towers, the etched phrase, the orientation of the heat signatures. Then he drew the message. Not the words, but the sequence of delivery. How they sent it. Using the planet's own magnetic field to pulse a message through a probe's short-range scan radius. Adaptive engineering. It wasn't defense anymore. It was doctrine. His fingers moved automatically, drafting a response protocol. Not to reply, but to reach. He wouldn't contact them until he understood what they'd built, what they'd chosen to show. The second drone crossed into the upper atmosphere. Readings showed controlled thermal fields in 13 sectors. Local weather suppression, something once theorized, never deployed. These people had no atmospheric stabilizers, no global AI grid. They did it with redirected heat plumes, landmass buffers, and natural gas flow rechanneling. And it worked. Orcs activated the drone's audio sensor. It caught rhythmic thuds, a constant churning in the crust below, like machinery powered by volcanic exhaust. Deep, grounded vibrations, the kind you could feel in your feet before you heard them. He rewound the feed. An outer wall flickered briefly, then vanished. Cloaking mechanism? No, too crude. More likely, a surface layer shell made of local mineral blend, molded into environmental camouflage. No shielding, just smarter rock. He typed one final note into his terminal. They didn't adapt to survive, they adapted to stay. This planet belongs to them now. He cut the feed before the drone could be compromised. He'd seen enough. The message wasn't for Earth. It was a verdict. Mork slid the decrypted footage across the briefing table, each frame a hammer driving into the silence of the underground op room. The satellite composite showed the second probe's final 30 seconds, a column of thermal discharge curling into the stratosphere. Not from impact, but ignition. Directed, steady, engineered. Beneath it, grid lines etched into the landscape, sharper than the bedrock could ever form naturally. The footage paused on the message he couldn't ignore. "We remember." "Gentlemen, that's not a distress call," Mork said. "It's a warning wrapped in restraint." Two operatives sat across from him, neither in uniform. One wore fatigues without rank, the other civilian clothes tight enough to show the scars around his collar. Both said nothing. "We have a window, maybe a week before Accord surveillance maps their heat bloom patterns. Once that happens, it's going to be labeled a breach of non-proliferation codes, and they'll move to sanitize. We don't have time to go through Earth Command. So, we form our own thread." He tossed a packet onto the table, paper, not digital. Every page was inked by hand, cross-checkered for embedded tags, scanned through spectrum filters. The front cover showed a triangle split down the center, with a blade piercing the base. The mission title beneath it: Operation Revenant. "What's the scope?" one of them finally asked. "Minimal visibility, no AI support, manual flight, analog encryption, one insert team, contact, no exfil. None, unless requested from the ground. They're not a lost unit anymore. This is sovereign space now." The man in fatigues rubbed the edge of the folder with a gloved thumb. "They'll kill us on approach if they think we're with the Accord. That's why we're using blackout suits and decommissioned transponders. Every component in our kit was stripped from Earth's Phase 2 infrastructure, obsolete to us, unrecognizable to them. What if the Accord already knows?" Morsk's eyes narrowed. They don't, but they're about to. Across the outer orbital shell of the Zathari Gate Zone, 4 light-years from Caldus IV, Accord reconnaissance ship Vraxian Hale adjusted its course without diplomatic clearance. Its onboard threat evaluator had flagged irregular geothermal activity in a no-electricity system. Autonomous systems fired a report into the Accord central security net. By the time command approval returned, the ship had already relayed a secondary flag to the Accord's Internal Threat Assessment Council. That trigger activated Protocol Clean Point. Within 2 hours, a 12-ship sanitization fleet lifted from orbit around Merkel. No war declaration, no public record. The Accord didn't need consensus to correct an old administrative oversight. The flagged system was listed as biologically hazardous, with no sign of viable life. To external forums, they were launching a geological stabilization study. Inside the primary strike carrier, Admiral Sen Rovik stood in front of a rotating surface map of Caldus CF, annotated with thermal spikes and projected power outputs. B-ship's readings. "Exceed dormant tectonic variance. We've got grid-level anomalies at 4,000 meters. Structured heat dispersion." "That's not volcanic," Rovek said. His staff remained quiet as he tapped the screen. "That's infrastructure built without authorization, which means interference. If Earth didn't do it, and we know they didn't, someone on that planet is making decisions. We erase them before the story spreads." The flagship's operations officer leaned forward. "Command wants full sanitization?" "Complete," Rovek replied. "We remove whatever took root there. Then we pull the core drives from any probes in orbit and erase the source logs. We leave no narrative behind." As the sanitization fleet crossed the jump corridor into Caldus range, Mork's forward recon team activated their cloaked frigate from beneath a comms-dampened asteroid field. Their ship bore no identifiers. Its navigation systems were analog, its propulsion tuned to emit radiation within the spectrum band of derelict miners. Morsk strapped into the crash seat, helmet in hand. A small lens over his right eye displayed the orbital pattern of incoming ships. 12 unknowns, staggered V formation, not Earth. The name registered in his mind like an alarm. Vraxian Hale. He'd seen that ship in an old dispatch, used in enforcement operations when Accord targets were labeled politically toxic. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to wipe. He turned to the comms tech seated beside the hardline array. "Get me to the ground, I need transmission reach before they enter atmosphere." The tech shook his head. "Our window's gone." Their spread formation closes the upper tiers in 17 minutes. You'll burn in before you hit half glide. Then give me 50 kilometers of altitude and jettison the rest. I'll take a glide pod. You'll hit sheer turbulence from their descent vectors. Then I land off balance. The tech hesitated. Morsk locked his helmet. Launch the pod. The frigate's gravity compartment vented slowly. No autocorrection, just tremors from metal ribs expanding under heat. Morsk stepped into the chamber, clipped his safety line, and slammed the manual launch handle. The glide pod rocketed away with no internal dampeners. His ribs cracked against the harness. Sweat streamed down his face as G-force constricted his lungs. Through the forward panel, the upper curve of Caldus Ivy began to rise, jagged rock lines pushing through sulfur cloud veils. Between them, the Accord fleet began its entry burn. He was late. The forward visual feed caught the lead ship initiating atmospheric flare, yellowed heat flares slicing through cloud bands. The second ship followed, then the third. Then static. The screen died. Morsk clutched the panel edge, whispering to himself, not in panic, but in fury. They're walking into a grave they think is empty. The pod's angle shifted, smoke trailing behind. Descent range dropped fast. Beneath him, the ground began to split. Guided tectonic plates shifting, too rhythmic for nature. He saw it. A defense grid rising from underneath the rock-like ribs from a buried skeleton. The colonists were not waiting to be found. They had been building for this moment. Haldesic, defense grid, local time 6:19. Strike event report, live feed extract. Source, Deepland Tower, Echo 6. The first carrier died before it broke through cloud cover. A lance of compressed alloy burst from a cliff-side seam disguised beneath a column of basalt, its surface textured to blend with erosion lines. The projectile struck with zero propulsion signature. Freefall acceleration only, corrected mid-air by magnetic current looping through anchored fault rods. The impact collapsed the carrier's keel like a split bone, slicing through reactor housings and igniting containment rupture. The detonation scattered alloy husks over a 12-kilometer radius. A second ship dropped low to stabilize, scanning for surface artillery signatures. It caught a reflection from what looked like a collapsed cave mouth. As it shifted angle, the opening revealed its purpose. A tri-spike trench mortar loaded with inverted arc shells. The launch sequence fired on a delay. The impact was vertical, timed with a quake pulse triggered by subterranean pressure vents. Ship 2 broke into 3 sections. None reached the ground. Inside the buried command node known as Stoneback, Jack Orrell stood with one hand on a sublayer transmitter and the other holding a detonation key etched with coordinates instead of numbers. "They're descending in formation," a voice called out from the ops table. "Split them, collapse Sector 12 first." The operator triggered the fuse signal. Along a ridge carved by 2 decades of adaptive excavation, a buried vein of charged magnetite ignited. It twisted a local gravity well out of alignment. The third carrier banked, then lurched sideways, straight into an upward thermal spike. Its stabilizers never activated. It rotated 300 degrees and broke apart mid-tumble. The air shook. Above the clouds, fire trails bloomed and dimmed. Inside the fourth vessel, Admiral Rovic gripped the armrest of his chair as structural warnings flooded his screen. "We've lost fleet cohesion, defensive fires coming from the terrain itself. These aren't field cannons. The rocks are moving." He turned to his adjutant. "We built this with their hands. They weaponized the fault lines. Do we abort, sir?" Rovek stared out the side panel at a rising column of ash twisted into a helix by temperature differences. "We're too close. They'll hunt us if we pull back. This planet doesn't want us here." A high-pitched crackle erupted over the fleet-wide channel. It wasn't interference. It was a broadcast. 4 voices spoke in unison. Human cadence. Flat delivery. We weren't waiting. We were preparing. Inside Tier Morn, an orbital railgun platform formed from collapsed refinery hulls and scavenged satellite cores. Rookhaven input the firing solution manually. Each target vector had been calculated against terrain wind shear, satellite drift, and gravitational lag. A line on the lead evac runner. "The one breaking south," Halvin said. Beside him, 2 younger colonists adjusted the charge coils. A third braced a hand against the reinforced viewport as the ship's makeshift platform aligned its spine to the curvature of the planet. They wore no insignia. Their uniforms were patchworks of fiber mesh and composite plating, salvaged from cargo wrecks. Halvin tightened his glove and placed it against the firing trigger. "Let's speak to them." The projectile ejected without recoil. From orbit, it resembled a streak of black glass, silent against the vacuum, before tearing through the atmospheric barrier. The Accord runner, trying to break vector and flee, caught it across the dorsal engine section. It didn't explode, it unraveled. The projectile was segmented with microblades, splitting compartments open like unsealed fruit, ejecting crew and systems alike. The debris trail scattered over a stretch of Caldus Ridge that had once been a harvest basin. Inside Morsk's glide pod, still descending, the sky above fractured into red arcs. The fire didn't come from above. It came from within the mountains. Projectiles shaped by pressure-molded rock, fired with spin alignment only achievable through practiced calibration. He stared through the side viewport as carrier number 6 lost its central thrust and flipped end over end into a dormant caldera. The crash didn't trigger a volcanic reaction. The magma chamber had already been siphoned out, diverted years ago. That crater was a decoy, a trap. The colonists had spent years turning the planet into a coffin with rotating walls. From his comms pack, a relay buzzed. A local channel, encrypted. He opened it. Jacques Orel's voice, direct and calm. "You're either with the ones who abandoned us, or you're not. If it's the latter, adjust your glide course to the valley behind Gridstone Ridge. If it's the former, you've got 2 minutes to change your mind." Morks keyed in the override and angled the pod west. Below, 4 more Accord ships tried to regain elevation, but the terrain under them cracked open again. Ash fields, magnetized from embedded coils, shifted their density, creating pockets of disrupted lift vectors. The ships couldn't stabilize. Their systems failed without ever understanding why. The ash didn't hide them. It pulled them down. In orbit, Admiral Rovek's flagship spun off path, attempting to retreat beyond Caldus gravity. Tyrmorn's core reactor cycled once more. Haben watched the data roll through. They always retreat, but not today. The second rail slug launched. It was slower, heavier. It was designed not to destroy, but to rupture the database first. Erase their command history before the ship could self-destruct. When it struck, the rear hull imploded. The flagship cracked along its dorsal line, releasing twisted beams and shredded transit compartments. The last remaining Accord ship initiated scuttle protocol. It exploded before it could reach safe jump distance. Inside Stoneback, the team watched the orbit feed dim. Visual sweep shows no inbound contacts. Thermal trails confirm full breakdown. "Survivors?" asked a technician. "Minimal," Orel replied. "They won't come back with reports." He keyed a final channel. To Morsk. This wasn't for Earth. And it wasn't for revenge. Inception transcript. Galactic Ethics Council. Initiated at 1403 UGT. Recording type. Visual Audio Forensic Archive. Moderator. High Arbiter Desun Vor. The tribunal chamber hissed to life. Atmospheric balance shifting with every new species entering the elevated rings. Soft light filtered through layered transparency barriers above, bouncing off pale stone floors carved with centuries of precedent. Delegates from 62 sovereign systems lined the tiered dais, each with their own interpreter drones wired directly into their neural ports. The air smelled of iron compounds and mineral balm, a mix used to keep interspecies respiration normalized. The silence was procedural. It broke when a singular blue pulse shot across the main dais. Earth's delegation flagging, active file release. Garen Morsk stood at the podium alone, wearing a patched gray uniform from Earth's dormant envoy corps. No emblem, no backing body. His expression held the same cold focus that had guided him into the Caldus orbit without clearance, and returned him with data that fractured diplomatic reality. "Council members, I am not here to ask permission," Morth said. "I am here to show you what your colleagues tried to erase." He keyed his terminal. The first clip played without introduction. From a low orbital view, the footage showed Caldus IV's ravine systems rippling in a sequence of engineered detonations. Thermal overlays displayed elevation-controlled tectonic shaping. Audio data parsed and denoised transmitted the layered hum of subterranean power cycling. Not abstract, but timed, stable, manufactured. The screen shifted to footage from Tyr Morn's firing deck, where 4 colonists stood before a firing sequence, not with weapons in hand, but with control pads and magnetometric boards, guiding a launch from a platform made from refinery wreckage. Then came the still image of the message burned into the cliffside. Kept standing. Morsk cut the feed after 10 seconds. "I'll submit full telemetry logs for council audit," he said, voice clipped, paced for translation efficiency. "The data confirms post-abandonment survival through engineered adaptation. The infrastructure matches no Accord-approved framework. And the Accord's response? A non-consensual strike operation initiated without public record or cross-species consultation. Council member Tarzadin of the Relic Combine, a 4-limbed arbiter species known for its legal exactitude, spoke first. Translator modulating the clicks of its jaw. "Do you allege the Accord committed an unauthorized extermination act under false pretense?" Morsk didn't flinch. "They didn't just lie, they erased. The planet was scrubbed from registries within 17 days of forced relocation. All Earth-side communication records redirected or corrupted. Your internal systems carried out an administrative deletion labeled environmental reassessment failure. That's not neglect. That's deliberate burial." The projection dome flickered. Another feed began, this one internal Accord footage Morsk had recovered from intercepted emergency broadcasts during the strike. Panicked voices, command relays shouting contradictory orders as surface weapons crippled descent craft. Then the last broadcast from the Vraxian hail, where Admiral Rovek's face appeared in static flecked overlay. "Hostile ground systems are intelligent. These aren't survivors, these are builders. Tactical fallback. Initiate Scud." The feed cut there. Council member Dole Elnor, representing the Vasari Triumph Collective, a species whose neural lattice responded aggressively to acts of deception, hissed through its cranial gill vents. Why were we not informed of the relocation? Or of the extermination order? The Accord's lead representative, Euron Keth of the Kelvar Accord Bureau of Sovereignty, rose from his dais. His voice carried the tired rhythm of political damage control. "This session is being manipulated through unauthorized disclosure. These materials were obtained through espionage and confirmed through triangulated relay logs from 14 neutral monitoring satellites," Morse cut in. "The data matches timestamps from independent commerce routing channels. The feeds don't lie." A whisper chorus erupted from the upper tiers. Species without speaking mouths, vocalizing through neural signal overlays. Images projected as swirling thought forms above their translators. Accusations. Demands. The moderator called for order. "Council will consider evidence under the Ethics Charter Clause 9, Restoration through Transparency," De Sunvor said. "Earth's materials are admissible under Article 6, given that no formal declaration of war occurred." A new feed played. Drone footage from the ground, displaying human colonists working side by side to build power lines using lava-hardened piping, layering ashcrete walls against wind pressure, instructing children on topographical grid logic with maps carved into cooled slag. "We were told these people died within the first month," said Councilmember Sael Varun of the Lithari Continuum. "Instead, they created planetary architecture by hand. Then we tried to remove them," Morsk replied. "With 12 warships." The next image hit harder than the rest. A vote screen filled the tribunal dome. Anonymous input from every council species. A digital referendum triggered mid-session. The question, should the Accord's actions on Caldas I be condemned as a breach of galactic charter? Votes flashed across the screen. 42 yes. 8 abstain. 12 no. In real time, 5 Accord-linguic species withdrew their flags from the central dome. Delegates walked out, projection sigils fading behind them. From their side of the chamber, protest files flooded the data links. 3-dimensional banners showing the phrase, born, left, forged, in 50 languages, rendered in holographic glyphs, not laser plasma. One species submitted a sculpted image of the kept standing cliff inscription as protest art, to be carved into the ethics hall exterior. Morsk didn't smile. He didn't blink. Belly didn't rise in defiance, he said. They rose because they were buried. And when they stood, they didn't call for revenge. They just showed the world what you tried to forget. The moderator raised one hand. The council acknowledges Earth's findings. A motion is tabled to suspend Kelvar Accord operations, pending further investigation. Morsk turned and walked out. He had no interest in their investigation. The truth was already public, and from this point forward every species in the galaxy would have to choose. Forget Caldas IV again, or live with what it meant. Arcane Vault Stone Archive. Access level, inheritor only. Not for Earth, not for Accord, for the ones who stand next. You don't start a war by building weapons. This one was particularly damaging, because absolutely everything but inoffensive had happened in the silence after someone stopped calling. We tried for 21 months. Every day at the same hour we sent signal bursts. Tight beam lasers bounced against orbital drift, relay buoys fashioned from mining satellites. Even fire-coded signals flashed across valley floors using mirror sheets made from flattened solar panels. No reply ever came. Not from Earth, not from the Accord, just silence. Or what passed for it on Caldas 6. Or what passed for it on Caldas. The cliffs groaned every night. The air hissed from pressure drops that came without pattern. Creatures shrieked through rock hollows, echoing frequencies that disoriented our internal guidance systems. But we got used to it. We had to. We didn't have noise-blocking tech. We had felt fabric and earthen walls packed thick with volcanic ash. We used stone before we used steel. And when steel failed, we rewrote the rules. I remember the first time we stopped trying to leave. A boy named Tamir, only 12 then, walked into the broadcast chamber and asked if we'd seen anything in the sky. We told him no. He nodded, walked over to the signal repeater and turned it off. Not out of anger, not out of despair, but because he realized the signal wasn't doing what it was supposed to. That day, I wrote one line on the chamber wall. We won't spend forever waiting. It's still there, burned into the stone, untouched. We didn't shift to war planning immediately. First, we learned to breathe. Caldas has 3 primary oxygenation bands, all unstable, but at ground level, during the mid-season, cycle 14 to 22, there's a window of breathable density. We mapped it across time, then we built our domes to match those patterns. Not perfect domes. Not sealed domes. Filtered arches, open enough to allow cooling gas to pass, tight enough to screen out ash. Then came the predators. We lost 4 men to the first encounter. A bipedal stalker 6 meters tall with jaw tension strong enough to sever conduit steel. We didn't fight it. We followed it, observed its feeding pattern, then noticed it never approached during seismic peaks. That gave us our first insight. These things feared tremors more than they feared us. So we built tremors. Using charge packs left behind from the original colony rigs, we created microbursts across our perimeter, timed with sound bursts from hollowed rock drums. The creatures adapted once, tried attacking from underground. We responded by pouring quick-setting slag into cave mouths, hardening the tunnels into sonic amplifiers. They left after that, We didn't wipe them out. We just made them feel unwelcome. Same rule applied to the Accord. We always assumed someone would come eventually, curious or cruel. We didn't want them to see survivors. We wanted them to see architect. Each terrain trap was mapped in layers. Some used heat plumes redirected through rock veins. Others were kinetic rod clusters embedded beneath loose shale. No electronic triggers, just measured balance. A wrong-footed drop would shift the rock, dislodge a rod, and let gravity finish the sentence. One of our oldest traps was based on magnetics. Blue sand, crystallized silicon and powdered ore, responds to concentrated pulses. We figured out how to mold it, not with machines, with heat. We'd pour it across fire-heated copper molds, let it cool into mirrored shapes. That blue sand became our signal language, flashing code messages across valleys at night, shaped by wind, reflecting from cliff to cliff. Every letter was a reflection, every sentence a cascade. And those mirrors weren't just for us. They became our sensors. If an enemy scout crossed a line, the light wouldn't bounce right. One of our watchers would spot the anomaly. We'd never say anything. Just trigger a soft fall behind them. No impact, just movement. A hint of being watched. That did more damage than an explosion ever could. War, real war, isn't about killing. It's about permanence. If you want your enemies to leave you alone, don't just fight them. Teach them they'll never understand the rules. We built our final doctrine after year 11. We had failed attempts. Deploying active drones without shielding led to system burns. 2 men died when we miscalculated a lava channel's direction during a redirect test. Their names are etched into the obsidian wall above the primary grid line. No one forgets them. But that year we succeeded in something different. We tamed the Skytreader. It's a glider beast, long, four-winged, with skin like reinforced bark and eyes tuned to electrical storms. We found one injured near the fault basin and stitched its wing membrane with fiber from our own suits. Took us 3 months to earn its trust. Once it flew again, we followed its pattern and learned to mimic it. That's how Tyrmorn's tracking system was born. We didn't program it, we patterned it. Every launch vector for that railgun came from flight curves observed in the Treader's escape maneuvers. We turned fear into calculation. I wrote our doctrine in a book bound with volcanic leather. It's not stored in a vault. It sits on the center shelf in the main archive. It has only one title. We were left. We never planned to send it anywhere. It's not for Earth. It's not for the Accord. It's for the next colony that gets dropped into a hole and told it was a mistake. Some might call what we did savage, others call it survival. They're both wrong. We built a world that didn't need rescue. We engineered a defense that didn't need a standing army. We didn't wait for instructions. We became the. If Earth ever tries to bring us home, they'll find the landing zone empty. We moved inland. If the Accord tries again, they'll find the terrain has shifted. We are not soldiers. We are not exiles. We are evidence that survival isn't the end of a tragedy. It's the beginning of a blueprint. Mork's final mission log. Classification level. Decommissioned. Archive ID. F_mistake. The message came through before sunrise. No encryption, no flare pattern, no layered cadence. Just 3 words, spoken in a tone that wasn't hostile, but final. We decline repatriation. Morsk sat in the mobile relay dome on Earth's lunar gate, transmission still playing on loop across the secured feed. The operator didn't ask him what it meant. No one did. The phrase had been enough. The colonists had made their position clear. They weren't coming back. The diplomatic draft he'd spent 6 weeks shaping was still open on his side screen, untouched since the previous night. He had rewritten the second paragraph 7 times, removing phrases like reintegration, territorial review, and probationary zone, all obsolete now. What Earth had sent was a gesture. What they got in return was closure. He reached for the seal imprint tool and applied the official mission archived stamp onto the file's index entry. The imprint glowed red for 6 seconds, then disappeared. its trace now only visible to high-clearance observers. The title of the folder changed automatically. Final mistake. A secondary file generated alongside it. Planetary classification petition from Earth's Astropolitical Oversight Division. Morsk opened it. Reclassification request. Caldus IV, Caldus Sovereign Zone. Restricted Human Control Territory. Access. Denied to Accord Entities. Observation. Rights. Conditional. Enforcement. Passive deterrence. He approved the request without edits. He didn't need to fight to preserve their independence. They had already proven they didn't belong to anyone. An hour later, Earth's delegation transmitted the updated status to the Galactic Ethics Council, who sealed the Accord's prior motion under Clause 12 consequences of confirmed breach. Multiple species requested border verifications around their own minor colonies. The Relic Combine revised its neutral territory laws. Visceri trade fleets rerouted around Accord-link systems. The fallout wasn't instant, but it began, and it didn't stop. The Caldus event, once redacted, then denied, became the cornerstone of a shift no one had planned for. Not war, not conquest, recognition. Down in the southern quarter of Earth's orbital archive, a slow-cooling satellite was retrofitted with a deep-range passive array. It would monitor Caldus from low-drift orbit, but never interfere. That was the agreement. That was the boundary. Above Caldus IV, a new relay buoy went live, built by the colony, deployed using tether launch without assistance. Its signal pulsed 3 times every cycle. It didn't transmit data. It didn't ask for help. It simply broadcast the original ping, the one Earth had received nearly a year ago, now amplified and locked. Coordinates time status active. That's all it said. And that was all it needed to say. On the ground, Jack Orrell stood before the oldest structure left untouched in the initial descent zone. A shattered comms array, surrounded by a stone ring marked with the names of the first lost colonists. Not buried, not erased, just engraved into the raw surface. Beside him stood Rook Halvan and the others who had shaped the doctrine not as warriors, but as architects. We never wanted sovereignty, Rook said quietly, not to Orrell but to the wind threading through the valley. We just refused extinction. Orrell nodded. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a compact stone tablet. Not tech, not broadcast equipment, just hardened slate. He placed it at the center of the ring. On it he'd carved a final line. We are not yours, but we remember. They didn't call a meeting, they didn't celebrate. The people of Caldus IV returned to their bunkers, their towers, their volcanic gardens and predator-watching cliffs. They resumed what they'd always done. Endure. Build. Refine. Back on Earth, Morsk watched the ping repeat across the observation feed. Every time the beacon blinked, it registered across the network not as a signal flare, but as a living planetary heartbeat. And in that rhythm, a new diplomatic doctrine was born. One not built on treaties or imposed protection, but on memory. Memory of abandonment. Memory of survival. Memory of what happens when you underestimate the wrong species. Caldus IV had not just endured. It had changed the map. What would you have done if Earth had given you the choice? Return or remain sovereign? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more ruthless, awe-inspiring HFY stories.